part of democracy, not a separate thing, but this is thinking of democracy as a way of life. And the movement for local living economies, remembering that small family-owned businesses still produce half the jobs in this country, that this is now a network of I believe, a couple hundred cities. And I'm going to Bellingham this week to speak there at the city that is perhaps best known for its creating a consciousness of local first. And so now in that town of Bellingham, 60% of the residents, through the initiatives of the store owners coming together and showing people the value of buying locally, where the wealth can circulate and stay in the community, 60% now prefer to shop in these stores. These buy local, think local first movement is very real in this country. So there's the level of enterprise, the level of community, and then of course the level of government itself. What does living democracy look like as it applies to our economic life? Well, certainly one obvious dimension, if we're talking about living democracy working as it disperses power and prevents the concentration of power that we know brings out the worst in us. We see it now finally in the Obama administration beginning to step up to the monopoly power in agribusiness, for example, with Monsanto. I don't know if you've been reading these stories, but Monsanto controls now germplasm in 80 to 90% of the seeds in corn and soy. And as a result of that monopoly power, that the prices for these seeds have grown at 4 to over 6 times the consumer price index since 2001. So part of living democracy is accepting, of course, that government is there to create the values boundaries within which the market works, and one of those boundaries is to prevent monopoly so that we can actually have a fair and free market. And in fact, on that note, I would like us to redefine free market as the freedom to participate in the market. That's the real free market. So, and part, of course, of a living democracy, it relates to economic life and government, is government stepping up to create the legislative framework that then draws people into being producers instead of just consumers, say, of energy. And the most remarkable example of this was birthed, I think, in Germany. And I call it, because it has a funny name when it's translated from the German, I call it reward renewables laws. Basically laws that say if you are a householder and you produce any form of clean energy, that you will be compensated for that at a rate that will give you a very good return for your investment over a 20-year period. So of course, householders all over Germany are stepping up in this one of the fastest rates of movement toward renewable energy. I believe now well over 15% of energy, of electricity in Germany is produced by these renewable sources, dispersed so that they're much safer from every dimension you think of safety, and that's coming to the United States. Fort Lauderdale, I believe, Florida just passed a unanimous vote, a reward renewables law that is working beautifully there because people see that, yes, part of democracy is making the market work in a way that serves us all. I'm also seeing living democracy emerging very much in cultural life, which includes, I believe, education of our kids. So that, to me, living democracy is emerging when I see what is, I love, in Maine they call it apprentice citizenship. Instead of just service learning, which always has a bit of do for in it for me, they call it apprentice citizenship. So youngsters, very young kids, are out in the community addressing environmental problems and public safety problems. And I'll never forget this little kid I interviewed. He said, think about it. He was involved in a public safety thing where he was teaching little kids to wear their helmets. He said, think about it. I might be saving lives. How cool is that? And you know, his teacher said, I couldn't get Kevin to write anything, but when it came to writing an essay about what he was doing with these younger kids, he was on fire about it. So that sense of being useful, being purposeful, giving kids that chance for power very early in life. And I think about also a movement. Have you ever heard of Youth Build? Do you know Youth Build? Well, Youth Build was started by a friend of mine named Dorothy Stoneman in Harlem in the late 70s. And now 92,000 kids who had dropped out of school, who had no future. They have been brought into, it's so common sense, it's brought into an empowerment model in which young people can get their GED, can learn a building trade, and can rehab, often for homeless people, rehab a housing unit, and learn the skills of living democracy. They get to elect, they get to help choose staff, they're part of the fundraising approach, and these young people their lives are transformed. They have now rehabbed, I believe it is 19,000 units, and now are spreading throughout the United States. The Obama administration has put more funding into this, 273 sites across the country. I think of this cultural transition to living democracy in the form of time dollars. Do you know about time dollars? Where communities can, where everybody's time is equal, and there's a neat computer program you can go to at timedollars.org, and you can say if you are a good seamstress and somebody else is a good tax preparer, hey, you can get your clothes altered and they can get there. It's such a community building, and it's all, we all are equal. The lawyer's hours is the same as the babysitter's hours in terms of value. And then I think also of the emergence and living democracy, new approaches to decision-making that go way beyond just voting or just having sort of loose discussion and a hand raise. Because over the last 20 years or so, and one of the leaders of this movement is here in your community named Tom Atlee. Tom, are you here? There he is. I thought I recognized you. But Tom Atlee is a very old friend of mine and who's inspired me in all of my work on living democracy. But he is a leader, a trailblazer really, in an international movement that is developing everything from what are called citizen juries, such as worked in Mali, where farmers of all sizes came together and talked about whether they really wanted GMO cotton in Mali. And after hearing from what was going on in other countries, including from India, where people were totally wiped out, who had been taken in on the GMO cotton route, that they decided as a group, no, they did not want their government to allow GM cotton into their country. The citizens' jury also, and then there is another technique called the deliberative poll, which, believe it or not, having grown up in Texas, yes, I was born here, but I grew up in Texas, unfortunately for me, but in Texas, that the utilities there use the deliberative poll, which is a variant of this process of group decision-making, that actually allowed citizens to weigh in about what they wanted in terms of energy sources and renewables versus non-renewables, et cetera, et cetera. And those deliberative polls are one of the reasons that Texas, even under George Bush, began, as governor, began to move toward being a leader, as it is now, in wind energy. And most recently in Michigan, people were brought together where they were chosen randomly, scientific random sampling of people, brought together and given a lot of information about the economic downturn and terrible situation in Michigan, and then asked to come up with solutions. At the end of a weekend of deep deliberation, they together, the majority of them, the vast majority of them, said that they wanted to increase their own income taxes to help turn their state around. That is what can happen. Just think if President Obama, instead of we getting last summer to those town hall tirades, what if we had together, if he had invited us into such a conversation? That's such a conversation, meaning that, you know, with background material we can read about and being welcomed into our libraries and our church basements to really talk with one another, and then had a place where our views could be registered by the federal government, all transparent about what we wanted in health care, in health insurance reform. Just think what a different place we might be today than we are in this still divisive debate. So this technology of deliberation is greatly, greatly increasing. So then we get to what does living democracy look like when it comes to politics? Imagine that, a real democracy as it relates to politics.